Welcome to Financial Planning Explained. I'm your host, Mike Menninger, certified financial planner, owner, and founder of Menninger and Associates Financial Planning. I'm pleased to have with me today one of my equity partners and also a lead advisor for the firm, Nick DeVito, also a certified financial planner. Nick, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Nick and I are working on a case. Well, it's an interesting case, and we like to bring up the case study simply because of the fact that I love doing case studies, because if we talk about all the different moving parts, we hope that something might apply to you, and it may have nothing to do with the baseline of it, but we talk about it and we use it just to be able to talk about different things.
And that too, while everything might not apply to you, oftentimes there are bits and pieces that apply to someone else's specific situation.
Right, exactly. So, that's the purpose of doing the case studies. So, this one involves an individual who is a surviving spouse, but the circumstances behind it are it's sort of interesting, okay? She's 58 years old and was in the process of a divorce, and during the process of the divorce, her husband died, okay? And subsequently, they do have one child, but having something to do with the divorce, I'm sure, that child has been estranged. It's an adult child, lives on the other end of the country on the left coast, is basically estranged. There's zero relationship there. Sadly, and you see it enough.
Yeah.
And the reality of it is that you always hope that at some point in time that relationship rekindles. Blood's thicker than water.
Mm-hmm.
And, they'll get over it. And, I've seen it with family members, and, there is a miscommunication or whatever the case may be. And, certainly you hope that that relationship comes back again, but that's a separate issue. Basically, there is a child and she is a widow. Okay. And so as a result, partly from receiving the inheritance from her spouse, she has about $2 million in an IRA, about $1 million in non-qualified investments, and about a couple $100,000 in cash and savings, and then about $1.5 million between in real estate, which is roughly equivalent in a shore property and primary residence. The only debts are about a $300,000 mortgage on the primary resident, sitting at about 3%. It's the type of thing nowadays makes you smile when you see that.
Yes, I would love if my mortgage rate was that low.
Hell, I'm 2 1/8, and I'm still paying it down, so I'm an idiot. But I'm also within a year of paying off my mortgage. So
beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing. I have lived since 1992 with a mortgage. It's just a mental thing, and we have this discussion a lot with people. So
yeah, I mean, kind of off that, and a lot of things that oftentimes we discuss with clients is there are two components to every financial decision. There's the dollars and cents, and there's the emotional. And as advisors, you can't do one without the other, because if you're purely dollars and cents and discounting the emotional, you're missing half of the battle. And so it's just something to keep in mind with every decision.
Well, look at me. I'm the financial advisor who should know better. Okay, I got a 2 1/8% mortgage, and I'm overpaying it.
Yeah.
But I got 1 year left. I got less than a year left on my mortgage.
But it makes you feel good.
Oh, you bet. That might be my Christmas present to myself this year. Just pay it off. So anyway, and her income's about 80 grand. A little bit more on a base fact. I said, would you like to retire? And she said, well, I don't think I can. I'm like, okay. And besides, what would I do with myself? Well, and that's a very valid question, because we always talk about it in that don't just retire for the sake of retiring, retire with a plan. I don't mean you have to necessarily plan out every day, but do you have hobbies? Are there things you like to do? If not, the last thing you want somebody to do is retire and sit on a house, eating potato chips all day long, because that's not healthy.
Yeah, and honestly, I think when people think of retirement, they most often think of the financial aspect of it, not necessarily the emotional, the day-to-day of it. For a lot of people, their jobs are very much intertwined with their everyday life. I mean, if you think about it, Monday through Friday for most people, for 8 hours a day, sometimes more, you're at a job. It becomes part of your identity. So it's an identity shift going
Absolutely.
from working to retirement. And furthermore, a lot of your social interaction that you get is in the workplace. And so not having a plan, obviously, we can talk all day long about this is how you plan from the financial side of retirement. This is what you should do. This is how you should collect Social Security, your retirement accounts, all that fun stuff. But the onus is really on the individual retiring to figure out the other part. We can't necessarily help and say, oh, well, go see this person every day or
Yeah, right.
figure out what hobbies you're interested in. It's really our jobs to bring that to the front of their mind so that they begin thinking about it. Because yes, it's a very daunting life change. And the financial aspect does tie into the emotional aspect as well. Because the question that a lot of people ask is, do I have enough? Can I do it? And what I always like to say is, while that's the age-old question of how much do I need, the answer, like you've heard Mike and I say dozens of times at this point, the answer to most financial planning decisions is it depends,
Right.
right? And when you're talking about retirement, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but it really comes down to what is your desired cost of living or lifestyle goals in retirement. And I'll use the two extreme examples. For an individual that, let's say their Social Security and pensions between the two of them, or between the Social Security and pensions, $5,000 a month, and their cost of living is $3,000 a month. Well, the answer to that question of how much do I need to retire is minimal for that individual because their income is covering their expenses. On the flip side of that, if their income is $5,000 a month, but they want to spend $20,000 a month in retirement, well, the answer to the question of how much do you need is much higher because you have a much bigger gap to fill. So I think we always encourage people to figure that out before they actually jump into retirement.
So interesting when you say the concept of somebody working. Interesting, and I'll tell you who it is. But I've got a client who's leaving her company and retiring, and today's her last day. And when I was emailing her husband on a separate issue, I said, make sure you tell her, congratulations, et cetera. And we're happy for her. And his response was, she's not happy yet.
Mm-hmm.
And because the anxiety associated with retiring is, big. I mean, if you've been working, to your point, you've been working 27 years, you've established a relationship with a lot of people every single day over the course of the last 27 years, and you're leaving that behind.
Yeah.
There's
definitely two sides to that coin because we deal with people on both ends of that spectrum. To your point, people aren't necessarily super excited the day of retirement. It takes some time to warm up to for a couple reasons. One, the financial side of it, of the paycheck not coming in and kind of shifting your mindset to, okay, now I'm distributing the assets, collecting a pension, whatever that may look like. They struggle with that part. But then to your point, the day-to-day not knowing what you're going to do, that's daunting. But then there are people on the way other end of that spectrum where they cannot wait to retire.
Yep,
But
there's them too.
What I'll say though, too, on that note of the not being excited yet is it does take time sometimes. I know a couple years ago we had a client retire. He was very much in that boat where not super excited about it, very nervous about it. Took him a few months. Then he really started to embrace it. And now he's playing pickleball and tennis and doing all that, be it spending time with the grandkids, doing all these fun things. And he's so happy he made that decision. So it can take time, but you'll get there.
Well, similarly, we had one who got laid off. And my response was, congratulations. Well, I can't do that. What am I going to do? I have to pay for medical insurance and everything else. I said, you're 63 and a half. I said, even if it costs $1,000 a month for your medical insurance over the next 18 months, that's $18,000. That's spitting in the ocean compared to the amount of money that you have. Well, I don't know if I can do it. 3 months, 4 months later, I'm like, how's this retirement thing working out for you? Oh my goodness, I can't believe how much fun I'm having and everything else like that. And a very common answer we always get. So how's retirement? I am so busy doing all these different things. I have no idea how I was ever able to work all these years.
Yeah.
So those are stories we always love to hear. All right. So we got off track. So, in this particular case, again, concerned about the possibility, what am I going to do if I retire? Can I have enough money? I got to pay for medical insurance. That's the one we always hear. How do I pay for medical insurance? with your assets. Okay. That's what they're there for. And so those are basically the things that we've got going on. So what are the issues? Okay. I'll throw a couple other pieces. We took a look at her Social Security, and her Social Security at her full retirement age would have been $3,200 a month. However, what we also looked at is if she were to collect the survivorship Social Security, it could be $2,000 a month at her age 60. That is a very, very important consideration. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on that simply because of the fact that maximizing Social Security benefits, do not underestimate what that can do for you.
Yeah, there are certainly a ton of nuances around Social Security, and a lot of the nuances associated with Social Security come when you're involving either in couples that are married, or especially in the case of a surviving spouse. And you heard Mike earlier just say that she can actually begin collecting the survivorship Social Security at age 60, which is different than when she'd be able to collect her own Social Security, which she would have to wait till age 62 to begin. So there's some strategy there too, and we're
absolutely, and we're gonna spend some time on that. Okay, so what were the issues basically that we're going to be laying out? We just touched real quickly on the fact that she can take the survivorship Social Security, which we're probably going to spend about 5 or 10 minutes just on that topic. Okay. We ran retirement income models. We'll talk about that as well. The concern that I had right the first time was the $2 million IRA. The $2 million IRA is poised to be a runaway train. We'll talk about that. And not just to her, but potentially to her son. Okay. Her investment account of $1 million has about $800,000 in unrealized capital gains, and it is invested extraordinarily risky. 2 times NASDAQ, 3 times the S&P 500. Okay. That's not risky. Okay. Particularly in light of the volatility of the market. Now, that said, why do you think the account is as good as it is? Because over the past few years, especially, if you're 2 times NASDAQ or 3 times S&P 500, that has made some good money in the last few years. But the downside is it could take a beating.
Yeah. And especially, I mean, anytime we're looking at an investment account, it needs to be invested as aggressively as they can afford from a distribution standpoint. In her case, if she were to retire, she would be using that investment account to fund a lot of her needs, especially because she's 58 years old. She's not 59 and a half yet, so she doesn't have penalty-free access to the retirement accounts yet. Plus, for other reasons that we're going to touch on later, might make sense for her to go there first anyways. And if we know we're going to be using that account, we might want to pull some of that risk back off the table.
Absolutely. So we have to deal with all those long-term capital gains. The large IRA, basically we are looking at doing Roth IRA conversions, and then throughout the whole thing, maximizing tax efficiency. Now, you want to talk about maximizing tax efficiency. Here's the problem we have. Our hands are tied. Our hands are tied because of the fact that we want to try to move that money out of the IRA, or else, as I pointed out, runaway train. And we also want to reduce the risk, which is creating capital gains. What am I doing here? I'm creating ordinary income for Roth IRA conversions, and I'm taking it in the shorts with capital gains.
Good problems to have. That the one thing I will say is these are all first world problems, having a large IRA, having a lot of capital gains. But to Mike's point, what we always try to do is how do we unwind those in the most tax efficient manner?
Correct. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break. What we just did is we laid out kind of the facts of the case. And then one by one, starting with the next segment, and this is going to be a 2-part episode, starting with the next segment, what we're going to do is begin to touch upon each one, a lot of the nuances associated with it, and take it from there. So stay tuned. We'll be back with you in just a few moments.
Do you keep up regularly with your investments? Where exactly are your hard-earned dollars going? Are you financially prepared for an emergency?
I'm Mike Menninger, founder of Menninger and Associates Financial Planning. We believe that education and knowledge are powerful, and we want our clients to understand why we are making the recommendations that we make. It's your money, and you deserve to know where it's going, because it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. So call us today to discuss your financial concerns. Welcome back to Financial Plan and Explain as we continue on with the case study. So in the first segment, what we did is we pretty much laid out the base facts. But what we're going to do for the rest of this episode, as well as going into the second episode, and oh, by the way, if this ends up being a 3-part episode, so be it. Okay? I think it's just a good thing to go through a lot of the things. So what did we do? The very first thing we always want to do is to take a look at the retirement income model. Are you in a adequate financial position? So in the discussion, basically, as I pointed out, her income is about $80,000 a month, which means that, yeah, $80,000 a month. Why would you want to leave that
exactly.
job? Thank you. Basically, take-home pay is somewhere in the vicinity of about $5,500 to $6,000 a month. Let's just call it $6,000 a month. Okay. And covers your cost of living. So basically what that does, periodically pulling money maybe for taxes on the property or whatever the case may be, but generally speaking, defined as the cost of living is $7,000 a month. So it's like, okay. So what we like to do is we usually like to start with somebody's goals and objectives. And if they tell us, well, I'd like to retire at age 65. Okay, great. What would you like to live on? Okay, great. And then we build it around there. But with our experience doing these, we looked at that and without even batting an eye, we had a pretty good idea that as long as her cost of living would remain the same as it is now, my goodness.
Yeah,
okay?
I mean, if the 4% rule is something people are very familiar with as a rule of thumb. You can draw 4% on your assets in perpetuity is kind of what they say there. But when we look at that, if someone with, $3 million in between IRAs and the non-retirement account, and then another 1.5 in real estate, we look at that and say, okay, even if you're taking 3% a year out of your $3 million, that's still $90,000 a year.
Minus the taxes.
Plus Social Security throughout, looked at that. We still, in those cases, we still run the model just because it's a nice visual. And we want to say, look, here's what it would look like in reality. And what you'll see on a chart of their assets, it just keeps going up even when they retire because they're just not spending enough to actually be bringing down any of their assets. But we always like to show it, even if Mike and I look at it and say, we know she's going to be all right, we still like to show it. And what also the modeling efforts allow us to do is to really run alternate scenarios and kind of stress test it in a way where we say, okay, well, what if you spent this X amount of dollars a month as opposed to the $7,000 a month? What does that look like? Just to give them that additional peace of mind. And when we do modeling, and honestly, what we'd kind of recommend that anyone does when they're doing modeling is be conservative with it.
All your assumptions, inflation, rates of return, spend, cost of living, et cetera, et cetera. Because one thing I always like to say, hey, you might be spending $7,000 a month or 6,000, whatever number I just said, you might be spending that. But the reality of the situation is that when you're retired, that pesky thing called work is no longer in the way of that cool thing called fun that you get to be able to spend money on. So we have a tendency to actually jack that up. Mm-hmm. And that is what we did. So you did the modeling, but basically what we did is, again, let's go back to the modeling before we talk about this, is the reason why we like to run very conservative estimates. We'll run a higher inflation rate, 3, which is not really high, and because the way inflation has been lately, but we'll run very low rates of return on the investments. We run it at 4%. You can do 4% without even opening your eyes. Okay, and that's not even having investments. That's basically money market almost. Okay, so we run that. We run higher inflation. We run inflation of 5% on medical costs. Then what we do is we'll say, instead of it being $7,000 a month cost of living, actually it was 6. Let's see what would happen if we did 8. And then we say, all right, well, you know what? That makes it by a long shot. Let's throw an extra $20,000 a year in fun vacation, a couple times a year going wherever it is, or once a year traveling around the world. We like to do that. And if all conservative assumptions demonstrate that they're still okay, then what it does is it kind of removes the catastrophic problem or just various problems that could happen, which is also called life.
Yeah. And honestly, one thing I like to really hone in on when I'm talking to clients about retirement specifically is my goal is not necessarily to get you to retirement. I want to be able to get you to work optional, because I don't ever want to force someone to say you have to stop working. But if you enjoy what you're doing and you want to keep doing it, by all means, continue doing it or work in another capacity, whatever it looks like. But getting our clients to the point or showing or demonstrating to them, look, you don't have to work if you don't want to, I think is very powerful. And it really reshapes their mindset going into work every day, knowing, hey, I don't have to do this. And it really just takes a load off where there's not that pressure that's traditionally associated with a job. Because typically when you're working a job, it's because you need a job to pay for things, right? So there's stress and you can't lose your job. And so knowing that going into the office or going into work every day really does reshape their mindset.
Oh, yeah. Without a doubt, I can assure you of that. So there's just a lot of things that we like to do when it comes to the modeling. And the other thing too is, we like to probe and be able to show that while we're doing it. Say, well, let's throw a few things in here. Were you thinking about buying another property? Were you thinking about funding a wedding, or all these different things? We throw that in there. Take a look at all of the pie in the sky goals and look for that. Now, sometimes we do that, and if all of a sudden it makes it so that they don't have enough money, then in a way that's good, but it's not good. But the one thing it does is it kind of demonstrates that almost everything you do from a financial perspective becomes a prioritization. If I don't have enough money to do all the 10 different things that I want to be able to do, then it becomes a function of prioritization. Do I need to take a $20,000 a year in vacation? I may want to. And if I say that is more important, then maybe what I say is, okay, instead of my retirement at age 62, I'll work until age 65 because that $20,000 a year in vacation is more important to me. But on the flip side, people may say, no, I want out by the age of 62. Okay, if that's what your goal is, then what needs to give in other areas? It may be $20,000 every year, every other year, or $10,000 a year. And we just look at all these different scenarios because we know full well that when people retire, they want to make sure that they do it with confidence. That's number one. Number two is if all of a sudden they realize, oh, shoot, I can't do this. Trust me when I tell you, it's going to be very difficult for someone to be able to go back into the workforce and make the money that they were making before they left.
Well, when we're doing retirement planning, honestly, the way I like to explain it is there's really 3 levers in which you have the ability to pull to change the outcome of your retirement. First, income. Now, that can be 2 things. You can either try to increase your income while you're working, or you can work for a longer period of time. You have a level of control over that. Obviously, we'd all want to make more money if possible, but you don't have direct control over that. You can't just walk into the office and say, I want to make $20,000 more this year, right? Doesn't necessarily work like that. And in terms of working longer, once again, you have some level of control over that. But hey, if you get laid off or whatever transpires that you don't have a job anymore, to Mike's point, going back and getting that same job at an older age discrimination exists, whether we like it or not, right? So you have some level of control over the income. Secondarily, you have the rate of return on your investments. That's another lever you have to pull. You have some control over that. You can, if you want to attempt to increase the rate of return on your investments, you can increase the risk in your portfolio, which should in turn lead to a higher rate of return over the long term. But once again, you don't necessarily have direct control over that. No one can sit here and control and manipulate the stock market and investments. Lastly, the lever you have to pull is the expenses. That's the most impactful and the one that you have the most direct control over of. And what I mean by that is oftentimes when we're running models, we start with that baseline number. What we also always like to show people is just by increasing your cost of living by $1,000 or $2,000 a month, it can very drastically change the outcome of your plan. So the conversation there, to Mike's point, is, well, what's the highest priority from an expense standpoint? But it has the most impact. And that's why when I talk about those three levers, I really hone in on the expenses because it's the one you have the most control over of and has the highest impact.
Correct. And so what we have a propensity to do is I always like to ask folks, all right, let's figure out your expenses. What's your cost of living? And a lot of times they'll throw it out. In fact, interestingly enough, if I've had people come to me and say, and they write down on this piece of paper and they hand it to me and say, this is my cost of living, I say, great. I add 30%. 30%? Are you kidding me? I don't spend 8,000 instead of 6,000. In so many words as you watch, because one of the things that they don't take into consideration, they'll give their Pico bill and their water bill and their mortgage and all those different things, but they don't typically include the discretionary expenses, which are a lot higher than anybody ever imagines. So what I suggest is that let's go figure out what your true cost of living is. And I always like to ask, would you like to do it the easy way or the hard way? Well, everybody always votes for the easy way. It's like, all right, well, would you like the accurate way or the inaccurate way? Well, they want the accurate way. And it's like, interestingly enough, the easy way is the accurate way. Of course, they look at me like I have two heads. But the reality of it is that what we suggest is you go over a finite 1 year period. I like to say January 1st to January 1st, but it doesn't have to be. But if you look at what the value of your checking and savings accounts were at, let's say, January 1st of a year ago, and then you look at the value of those accounts January 1st the following year, then you should be able to pretty easily figure out how much you've made in deposits, which would most likely be associated with your income. Okay. Which, by the way, if you look at your December 31st or your final pay stub of the year, typically the final pay stub of the year will show what your take-home income was. When you add up the take-home income, and let's say the take-home income was $100,000, if your bank accounts went up by 10,000, your cost of living was 90 grand. Why? Because you took in 100, you saved 10. That means your cost of living is 90. But if you made $100,000 in income and your accounts went down by 10, well, guess what? You spent 110,000. You may look at that and say, whoa. You know, I paid for a wedding last year. Now it's $30,000. You hope that's a one-time expense, right? But you can carve that out. However, one thing to be very careful of, and we run into this a lot, that we're working with clients for years and they say, oh, well, you know, I had this $10,000 expense. I had to fix the driveway and everything else like that. It was bad and so on and so forth, but it's a one-time expense. I'm like, yeah, okay. And then all of a sudden next year, it's like, yeah, you know, I had a plumbing problem. I had to replace my heater and all that. That was $10,000. I'm like, one-time expense. Oh, something happened with my back patio and I had to fix the concrete and everything else. And that cost me $10,000. And after this happens every year, you look at the client and say, hey, you know what? This one-time expense you have every year. We need to take that into consideration. And that's the type of thing that we look at. Now, I then ask, now, do you want to do it the hard way? The hard way is figuring out, what did you spend that $100,000 on? That's where you have to now look under the hood and see what you spent it on. That's the hard part. But there are apps out there that allow you to do it. I think Rocket, something or other, has an app.
You Need a Budget, Monarch Money. There's a bunch of them out there. And honestly, I don't suggest that people start there. To Mike's point, I suggest they start with the easy way. And they really only need to go the hard route if they need to figure out how to curb their spending. If they want to make it the first number that they figure out the easy way is going to give them the broad picture. If that needs to change for one reason or another, if they say, if we look at them and say, you know what, I don't think that's sustainable in retirement or for the rest of your life, that needs to come down, or they just look at it and say, oh my gosh, because oftentimes there is a lot of sticker shock associated with that number they first find out, because they, to Mike's point, people underestimate, they just don't think they're spending that much money. And what oftentimes happens is income creep really comes into play there, where as income goes up, expenses go up along with it. So maybe 5 years ago when they looked at their spending, it was X amount of dollars, and they kind of just had it in their head that it's still that, even though it's not. But really, they only need to look under the hood if they want to try to reduce that number, because it's very difficult to reduce that number without knowing where the money's going.
Yeah, where's it going? And a lot of it is oftentimes semi-frivolous spending. Eating out is probably one of them that is the easiest big ticket item that is within your control.
That and Amazon.
Oh my goodness, Amazon, and that's harder to track. Yeah. So anyway, we're going to wrap up this episode there. We're going to pick up the next as we move forward with this case study. So Nick, thank you very much. Stay tuned. Hope you have a great day and a great week. And we'll be with you again on the next episode of Financial Planning Explained. Have a wonderful day.